In 1850, Harriet Tubman rode from south to north, conducting slaves to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Abraham Lincoln rode Illinois' 8th Judicial Circuit, and Methodist minister Peter Cartwright rode a circuit too, preaching revival and abolition of slavery, stopping along the way in Bloomington, Illinois, to participate in the founding of a little college with big dreams, Illinois Wesleyan. In 1850, a time of social inequality, moral urgency, and future uncertainty, our university was born to be a place of learning, service, and purpose, where transformed students would transform the world. In 2015, the dream lives on, and the need is still great for wise and educated students who bring urgency to the persistent inequalities of our day, who will ride the rails and circuits of ignorance and injustice and use their gifts and talents to transform our world. Today, let us celebrate our founders and let us claim their vision once again, that we might follow paths that lead to genuine equality, to vibrant pluralism, to lasting peace. Please be seated.
Good morning and welcome to Founders Day 2015. Our honored guest speaker today is Anita Lobel, a woman who has captured the attention and stirred the imagination of children for decades through her work as an illustrator and author of children's books. We are delighted to have some of her illustrations currently on display in the Merwin Gallery. Anita Lobel is clearly at home in the liberal arts, in an environment like Illinois Wesleyan. I have learned over the last few days that she is the consummate, multi-talented student, with interests and skills ranging from language study and literature to opera and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Yes, you heard that right, motorcycles. She is serious about her work, but doesn't take herself too seriously. In a few minutes, Provost Green will introduce her formally, but I want to offer my personal thanks to Ms. Lobel for coming to campus to share her work and ideas with us over the last 3 days. And I must comment that it is unusual for a speaker to be willing to devote that length of time to a visit around this particular lecture. Your commitment of time and effort has simply been extraordinary. Thank you very, very much. At the time of our founding in 1850, there were many challenges facing the leaders of this nation. As I read our history, the roadblocks were formidable for those who sought to establish an institution of higher learning in Bloomington. A quick look at our charter provides evidence of just how difficult the financial challenges were at that time. In order to establish a firm financial foundation for the university, there was a last-minute alliance between business leaders in the community and representatives of the Methodist Conference. In fact, if you look carefully at our charter, you'll see a handwritten notation inserting the word Wesleyan between the words Illinois and University, something that was the result of that last-minute alliance and has persisted in terms of our name. Listed on the back of your program are the names of those who came together to establish the university. This was a diverse group of people, diverse in terms of background, religious beliefs, and walks of life. Many of their names are prominent in this community: buildings, streets, and families. I like to think that our current aspirations for diversity of thought, ideas, and perspectives are manifestations of the particular way in which our founding occurred. The efforts of our founders have been embraced and sustained over the years by generations of faculty and staff who cared deeply about the mission of the university and worked diligently each day to provide students with an undergraduate experience of the highest quality. That objective is facilitated by the efforts of faculty working individually, to be sure, but also through their collective efforts, working as the faculty as a whole. Both elements are reflected in some special guests who have joined me on the stage this morning. We have with us 8 faculty members who currently hold an endowed chair or professorship, the highest honor the university can bestow for exemplary teaching, scholarly activity, and service to the campus and the community. I would ask that each of these faculty members please stand and remain standing until all 8 have been introduced. First, Marina Balina, Isaac Funk Professorship. David Bolivar, Minor Linnaeus Scherf, Professorship of Botany. Vicki Foles, Carolyn F. Rupert, Endowed Chair of Nursing. Given Harper, Beach Lewis Chair of Biology. Carolyn Muskowski, McPhee Professor of Religion. Mike Seaborg, Robert S. Eckley Professor of Economics. Gabe Spalding, B. Charles and Joyce Eichhorn Ames Professorship. And Mike Young, Robert W. Harrington Professorship. Please join me in saluting these faculty members. In addition, there are 5 major committees that carry out the governance responsibilities of the faculty. Representing this group this morning is Nancy Sultan, Chair of the Curriculum Council. Nancy, please stand and be recognized. On this Founders Day, we wish to honor the enduring commitment and impact of all those who have served this university for its 165 years. We gather here to celebrate our founders for this convocation, for their courage and conviction, and as well to acknowledge the commitment of current faculty and staff who sustain that historical legacy. That inspiration, in my mind, is captured perfectly in a wonderful phrase that appears on the Founders Gate on the west side of campus. That phrase reads, "We stand in a position of incalculable responsibility." Thank you very much.
Good morning. 165 years ago, the founders of this great university established Illinois Wesleyan as, quote, "an institution of learning which shall shed brightness on all the land around and send down floods of light and blessedness upon generations yet to come." Generations have been blessed and enlightened as a result of their commitment to a brighter future through education. But as Dr. King said on our campus, we still have a long, long way to go. This year, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and yet we now see that important legislation being challenged and eroded through nefarious legal efforts, including Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder. During the past decade, we've seen remarkable achievements in marriage equality for gay and lesbian members of our community, and yet the FBI has reported that over 20% of hate crimes in the United States have been in response to sexual orientation. The fatal shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson last August and Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida in 2012 are grim reminders of Cornel West's acknowledgement that race still matters. Ignorance and intolerance are not the exclusive property of our nation. The Anti-Defamation League states that 26% of the world's population harbor some anti-Semitic attitudes. On a daily basis around the world and at home, we see crimes and acts of intolerance committed in the names of religions founded on doctrines of love and compassion. All year, we have been using the metaphor of walls and bridges to discuss those things that divide us and the means for transcending those divisions. As William Smith wrote in A General Idea of the College of Morania, his 1753 utopian essay on education that formed the foundation for the systematized curriculum that would become the model for the creation of the American Liberal Arts College. Hence it appears of what lasting importance it is to accustom youth early to distinguish the true from the false, by directing their studies to such things as come more immediately home to their business and bosoms. Were men as generally agreed what these things are, as they soon would be, could they lay passion and prejudice wholly aside, then indeed the business of education would be short, easy, and pleasant. And the government of Morania would have no difficulty in fixing on a proper and unexceptional plan for this purpose. But they saw with concern that while there were passion, prejudice, custom, malice, pride, ignorance, and different opinions in the province to struggle with, the best scheme they could concert would not be alike acceptable to all, and would be liable to many exceptions and misconstructions, no matter they did not deter from their duty. It is the struggle with passion, prejudice, custom, malice, pride, ignorance, and different opinions that leads us to enlightenment. These bridges are the floods of light and blessedness of our founders' dreams, and our guest speaker provides us with a personal example of the best of these aspirations. Anita Lobel is an award-winning artist and illustrator and the author of No Pretty Pictures, a memoir recounting her experiences as a victim of the Holocaust. Following a nightmarish youth, she had made a life filled with pretty pictures. Following her rescue from the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp, she was reunited with her parents in Sweden. In 1952, her family moved to New York, where she graduated high school and completed a BFA at the Pratt Institute. It was at Pratt that she met her late husband, the children's author and illustrator Anita Lobel, with whom she would collaborate on many books. Her first book, which she wrote and illustrated in 1965, was Sven's Bridge. No, not Sven's Wall, Sven's Bridge. The New York Times Review of Books named it a best illustrated book, and thus began a career producing nearly 60 books and numerous awards and honors. Anita Lobel's life and works are proof that the power of art in the written word can help us to find our place in a complex and conflicted world and to provide our lives with floods of light and blessedness. Please help me in welcoming Ms. Lobel.
That was a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how honored I feel being here. I'm not an academic person. I find myself like somebody in a costume, which is all right with me. Bear with me, and I'll try to tell you something about myself that might be of use, or if it isn't, Tommy. I've had the best time in the last few days, a lot because of Professor Balina, who asked me to come here, and I've met so many nice people, and everybody has been just wonderful. I am beyond honored. And that introduction is superb. Thank you so much. I'm not sure I deserve it. Yeah, not yet, anyway. There are so many anniversaries that are being mentioned. I have a couple. Actually, it's 50 years ago that my little book, which you see illustrations from in the gallery, was published. I didn't realize that until when all these years were being bandied about. 1965 was when the book came out. And my life has been changed many times, but that was a real change for something that remained with me. It was a solid part of my life for a long time. And I continue doing books. I have a very important manuscript coming out in about 2 months. It's about pigs. In costume. I stand here before you, university professors, students in a civilized institution of learning in the heart of America. I'm going to try to recall for you you bright, generous, kind people, some of the things that have happened to me. I'm finding it broad and miraculous, all of it. Christmas morning 2014, cozy in my nice little loft in Soho, lights and baubles on the tree, a respectable collection of presents under the tree. I lit a fire in the fireplace, prepared coffee, and set out a couple of breakfast goodies, a banana bread. My daughter-in-law sent from California a Swedish cake called sandkaka I often bake. I waited for my husband to join me and thought of Christmas morning 70 years ago. That morning in 1944, Nazis, shouting with rifles pointing, burst into the chapel, interrupted Mass and singing in the Benedictine convent, where for several months my brother and I and our Catholic Polish nanny had been staying, hiding in plain sight. We were shoved down the stairs from the chapel in the courtyard. The brick wall that surrounded the convent, my little brother and I was by my side. Other people had been rounded up. Perhaps a dozen men and women of various ages, people I had never even been aware of before. They had not been attending Mass in the chapel. They must have been hiding out of sight here and there. Christmas service or not, we were all Jews. I was 10 years old, my brother was 8. We were all pushed and lined up against the wall. My forehead and my nose were scraping against red bricks. I felt the butt of a rifle shoving it against my ribs. And I waited for the inevitable next moment. I remember clearly how detached I felt, how calm, probably catatonic. I wondered how it would feel when the bullet actually penetrated my neck and my skull. I honestly don't remember feeling fear, just an acceptance of fact and a torpor and numbness. Not even from the bitter, bitter cold of that Christmas morning. And with the familiar shouts of Schnell and Raus and Verfluchte Juden, we were pushed away from the brick wall into one of those canvas-covered trucks you have all seen in war movies. Nyanya was screaming and protesting that we were her children, her Catholic children. She was shoved aside. The nuns were shouted at. None of these people could do a thing. To this day, I do not understand why the shot to the back of my head did not happen. In Płaszów one evening, a couple of weeks later, Płaszów was a small concentration camp outside of Krakow, where Schindler's List took place. In Płaszów one evening, a couple of weeks later, some of the other people rounded up along with us at the convent were not quite so lucky. Oh, thank you. I'm losing my voice already. That's not good. This is a music school. In April, less than 2 months from now, 70 years will have passed since I came out from behind the barbed wire Ravensbrück concentration camp, and at the beginning of the forever exit from Eastern Europe. There have been many journeys, many displacements, many walls that rose in front of me, and also many bridges that I crossed either by accident or because they were offered and I took the opportunity. After recovering from tuberculosis in a sanatorium in Sweden, and even those moments were scary actually, because these people were rather stoic. That we had to board these white buses. They're still famous in Sweden. The Red Cross manned them. They were mostly volunteers. We were examined by doctors, and I always hated that. I associated doctors with what I had heard about experiments in concentration camps. But the people were kind. We got a lot of food, and we were even given milk. And I remember my brother and I discussing the fact that if they give milk to little Jewish children, things must be getting better. I didn't particularly crave milk, but for some reason I decided it was a sign of something good. So many times people have said to me, but you were robbed of your childhood. And I think about that, and I think about my life before the war. I came from a comfortable background. My parents were actually old. My mother was 40 when she started having children, and I don't really think they were a romantic couple. My father was a rather bon vivant, and my mother was sort of stolid. And most of my life, my very early childhood, I remember Nyanya. Nyanya was the one who took care of us. First me, and then my brother was born, and then all hell broke loose because I was jealous all the time. My parents and their friends and family members were observant Jews, keeping a kosher home, but they were not Orthodox, and they were still surrounded by a great amount of Polish anti-Semitism. Excuse me. Thank you so much. And all that meant is taking clues from what they perceived was and in spite of the Polish anti-Semitism, they still wanted to behave like Polish aristocracy or people from Vienna. They were also intimidated by German Jews, and they needed to have servants, so we had a nanny. They had 2 servants in the kitchen. She was a mad woman, but I didn't know that at the time. To me, she was a protective angel. She was a sort of exaggerated angel, or fairy godmother, if you will. Her mad protection kept us from the Nazis, but it also knocked the Jewishness out of me. Nyanya must have been very difficult for my parents to deal with. They were either not strong enough or not care enough to fight her. She imposed her authority over us, her little charges. I remember St. Nicholas Day presents on December 6th and a huge Christmas tree in our room, and I remember cutting and gluing those hoops of shiny paper to put on the Christmas tree. And then we lit real candles and let them burn for a while. They couldn't do it for very long. They were those little clip things you've probably seen in old movies or photographs. An oleograph known to many Catholic children depicting an angel with huge wings hovering powerfully over 2 small children crossing a rickety bridge hung over our beds. Nyanya always got her way. I really, really adored her. I adored my father. I was devastated when my father disappeared one night shortly after the Nazis marched into Krakow. It was explained to me that he had to go away to be safer for just a little while. He would come back soon. All I knew that nice, elegant man who smelled good and treated me like a treasure, probably to a fault, was gone. I was too young to have developed attachments to any uncles or aunts or grandparents. When they kept disappearing, I did not have the capacity to be able to comprehend the horrors that waited for them. It wasn't until later. You know, to a child living in times of peace, with more or less normal family strife, the bleakness and dangers of those years between 39 or 45 definitely spells no pretty pictures. But I sometimes wonder about what my life would have been like if the war hadn't happened, and if I'd stayed in Poland and never moved on. I don't think my life would have been, I wouldn't have been threatened, I wouldn't have lost my childhood, but I would have gained nothing. And I sound irreverent when I say these things, but I think I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Because since we survived, and since we ended up in Sweden, which was the most restoring and civilized experience that I ever had, in every way. It was an unhysterical place with kind, stoic people who weren't continually exploding in something. And since I was religious and Catholic, I truly, truly believed in the Christ child and the Virgin. Lutheranism was much more calm and peaceful and reasonable. I mean, the stories were still pretty, and when I was in the sanatorium, we had Sunday school, and I was given this lovely little book of the New Testament with beautiful, beautiful pictures. That was my first real book that I ever owned, actually. And after a while, I somehow picked up Swedish. I was in a room with 8 little girls who were also sick, and first they thought I was some kind of a monkey. I had no hair because I'd been shaved off in concentration camp. I'm obsessed with long hair and braids. I always have been. I still am. Fashion never dictated that I had to cut my hair. But I learned Swedish, I started reading books, I started hearing music, and this went on for about a year and a half until I was contacted by an agency, and lo and behold, they found my mother and Nyanya living together in Krakow. This was now toward the end of 1946. And then my father, who had been in Russia for 7 years, returned to Krakow, and I was inheriting my family back. It was miraculous. In 1945 was when we came out of the concentration camp, and ever since then, my life changed. At the age of 12, I went to school for the first time. I went to school in something that was called the sixth form. I couldn't get enough of it. I was teased by my classmates. I was odd. I didn't look like any of them. Everybody else was blonde. I was dark. By that time, I had hair. But there was no special singling out by teachers. I was just another student. After the years of life exposed to some kind of conflict, followed by danger, my life was surrounded by reason and calm. My braids were back, precious to me. I began to have a friend or two. That was sometimes confusing. I never had a friend. I was a good student, and for the first time in my life, I wrote well in my new language. I read Swedish classics, required texts for school. I loved all the things that meant school. Everything was a discovery. And of course, we lived in a nice city, so I started going to the theater. Always sitting in the very last row, because that's the only ticket that my parents could afford. I always make sure I have really good tickets to shows these days. Everything was a discovery. Pictures, stories, worldly things, numbers, geography lessons, what have you. I was starved for school, and I had much coming my way, and I loved everything about Sweden for a very long time. I would like to read you a little chapter. Let me read. Of course, since I graduated from Pratt, I have been an artist. I wanted to be a painter. Naturally, everybody who goes to art school wants to be an important artist. I wanted to do big murals of important people, workers' arise kind of things. I was showing a group of students who came to my talk in the art group pictures of Thomas Hart Benton's mural that were really laughed at for a long time in the 50s because they seemed so old-fashioned and corny when everybody started doing abstract expressionism. But that's the kind of thing I wanted to paint, heroic things with social meaning. Well, eventually, I think what happened in my picture books, and if you look at the pictures, they have some of those qualities. I advise, I'm not going to go on about my artwork because it's in the gallery, ready to be seen. And but I think some of the gestures and some of the drama of those kinds of paintings that I was aspired to got shrunk and miniaturized. Sort of like you can miniaturize a library now and have it in your telephone, but not quite so little. But the small pictures in my picture books do reflect my desire to do heroic or funny characters. And I've been very grateful for my profession. Sometimes I found it irritating and boring, but most of the time I've had not too many conflicts with editors or anything. Sometimes things would go wrong. My first ventures into so-called commercial art after I was married to Arnold, and we both were looking for something that we could put our skills to and started running around with our portfolios. I stumbled upon a textile design studio. I'd never done any textile designs, but I knew how to paint flowers. And I got a freelance job, which of course cost this man nothing because whatever I brought in and didn't sell didn't cost him anything. But while I was working for him, eventually I developed a real skill. And I was quite a successful textile designer. Meanwhile, Arnold quit the horrible day job and started peddling his pictures and eventually stumbled upon Harper and Row, it was called at the time, and a young editor who looked at his work and could see something in it. He didn't even have a picture. He didn't have any picture book oriented drawings, but he had something. And he also got a job. So the two of us were able to stay home, take care of our children. We were poor, but we were happy. And we were two little artists in 1958, 59, and on to the 60s. And eventually, both of us became more and more successful. It's been a very good life. Lots of bridges were crossed. But what I really wanted to cross for many years was the Brooklyn Bridge out of Brooklyn and live in Manhattan, which I did 30 years ago, and I've been living in Soho ever since. Unfortunately, Arnold died almost 30 years ago. I want to tell you how I discovered that I could be a painter, and I might as well read it from the book. Any of you who have read No Pretty Pictures, that's fine, but I think you would enjoy it if you do. This was my first year of high school. In my new, how have I got? How am I doing? How much time has gone by? Oh, okay, why not? You'll be here for a long time. In my new school one morning, the art teacher, a cheerful woman dressed in a colorful smock with beautiful pale blonde hair, coiled in a thick bun, came in and said, "Today we're going to learn something about observation and the use of aquareller." Even though it was a perfectly normal Swedish word that meant watercolors, it was not one the boys in the class were used to in their daily conversations. They started to snicker and make funny remarks and elbow one another. We gathered by the blackboard around Fru Malmqvist's big desk. She opened a portfolio and spread out colored prints of elegant rooms depicting tables with vases of flowers, sofas and chairs. The boys let it be known that they would have preferred pictures of pin-up girls. Next week, Fru Malmqvist was unruffled, maybe. Today, choose a picture of one of the things I'm showing you that you might want to render, and let's get started. Without much enthusiasm, just wanting to be obedient, I looked over the pictures carefully. My eyes fell upon a print of a pretty delicate chair. An armchair, 18th century, was printed underneath the picture. The grayish-white wooden frame had a delicate cluster of carved flowers in the center and on top. The same motif was repeated at the end of the curved arm supports. The seat and the open back were upholstered in a silky fabric in blue and white stripes. I knew I'd seen a chair exactly like this one before. The chair in the print looked just like the one I had been ashamed to sit down in, Herr Nielsen's apartment. Herr Nielsen was somebody who conducted me from the sanatorium to a temporary shelter of a youth camp outside of Stockholm, which had mostly a lot of young Polish children who have lost, children, by that I mean anybody from 10 to about 18, and they were not very nice. I was Jewish, but I went to church, and I could participate in their prayers with them, but there was a Jewish girl whom they never stopped bullying. She was just waiting to get out of there to go to Palestine at the time. It was before Israel was born. And I was not very nice to her because I didn't want to identify with who she was. I preferred being with the bullies. It was not very nice. Anyway, that was Herr Nielsen had escorted me, and I spent an evening or a night in his apartment in Stockholm before he delivered me to this place. My desk was in the back of the classroom near the window. October light was falling on the empty piece of nice art paper that Fru Malmqvist had given me. Brand new watercolor patties in a flat tin box, 2 brushes, a pencil, and a pink eraser was waiting for me. I was nervous and excited when I stepped out into the hallway to fill a little tin can with water from the sink. Amid the sounds of pencils and scratching, erasers rubbing, and brushes dipping, the grumbling from the boys had quieted down. I held the pencil in my hand and lightly and carefully sketched the outlines of the chair. I dipped my brush in the water and then rubbed it gently onto the square blue color patty in the tin box. There were several shades of blue nesting side by side. I started with one blue and then blended a slightly different blue shade into the brush. I saw some green in the blue stripes, and worked in a drop of color from the green watercolor palette, where the upholstery was stretched and curved toward the frame on the chair. The colors grew subtly darker. In the rounded center, they turned lighter and brighter. My brush dipped and caressed and tickled and wandered within my penciled outlines. I felt as if I were a little insect or fly or spider, taking a slow, careful walk up and down along the stripes, trailing, judging, matching, and translating the pale colors of the chair in the print to the chair in my drawing. This is very, very good. I was startled by Fru Malmquist's voice by my side. Hearing only the soft swish of the brush on paper and its tinkling against the tin can, I had dipped it in water, I had concentrated and rendered, almost completely forgetting the teacher and my classmates. You don't have, no, I'm not going to read the rest, but the short of it is that I was singled out in the classroom, designated as the class artist, softened the stigma of my clumsiness in gym and sports, and gradually even there my self-consciousness eased. After much choking and tension in the water of the Olympic pool that we went to several times a month, I learned to swim. I ran the 100-meter dash. I even did some pole vaulting. I was the goalie on a girls' soccer team. Anyway, sometimes the whole class went with Fru Malmquist to the art museum. When I looked at paintings then, I was not content to remain an admirer. I became the hungry wanderer and intruder into the outlines of lace on a wrist, into eyes and noses and hair, a traveler among trees and mountains against cloudy skies, a chiseler of shapes, of flower petals, and of the human body. I was a conspirator and a thief. I was an artist. So that was the beginning of my life as an artist. And who knows if I wanted to do something else. You know, refugees and exiles have a tenacity, and we grab at straws, I think. If something comes at my way or one's way, one grabs it and says, oh, sure, I can do that, or maybe I shouldn't do that. But there is both a kind of daring and a lack of confidence. There's a true lack of confidence that has to somehow be squashed down. And a bridge has to be crossed to the daring. And I think that's what happened to me. And actually, what I do is a very odd thing. In many ways, I'm a very quiet and private person, but I'm also a showy and spoiled kind of brat sometimes. That hasn't changed. You'd be surprised what can happen. You know, you don't walk around the entire time, well, I should be grateful, this is so good, that is so wonderful, look what happened to me, I should be dead. Many times along the way of my life, I've totally forgotten about it. I'm just a spoiled person, ungrateful for little things that I should be grateful for. And I'm really reminded of that when I'm sitting here and everybody's smiling at me. How in the world did I get here? It's not possible. Or, you know, the nice things that have happened with children's books or the few little plays that I was in and people applaud. It's all very, very nice, but you have to remind yourself that don't chew on it. Just be grateful, take it for what it is, and make something out of it. Look to the sky and say thank you. I still do that. I think maybe there's a rather devastating chapter in here, and I have read it before in public, and I think maybe I should read it again. Let's see, chapter 13. Yeah, if you bear with me, I would like to read it, because it's a contrast to what I've just been talking about, and gloating about. This was after we had been in the camp of Pashu for about, must have been 2 or 3. I thought that this whole journey from December 1944 to April 1945 was ages long, and that we had traveled or walked endless distances. but actually it wasn't that long, and it wasn't that far away from where I had come from. I didn't realize any of these things until I was much older. We had been in that camp in Płaszów where my uncle and aunt and my cousin had been incarcerated after the Krakow ghetto was liquidated. And somehow my uncle, and I didn't really know this until afterwards, because there was no reason for my brother and me to have survived that ordeal, that arrival in that camp, or that we were allowed to live. And he evidently went to the commandant and pleaded for his sister's children, because he had built bridges for them. He had built bridges and fortifications for the Nazis, and had a little bit of pathetic clout, and he was able to negotiate that. This was nothing I knew at the time, but I'll read some of this chapter. It was night when we drove through a gate and saw the guard towers and the barbed wire. I knew at once we had been delivered to a concentration camp. Inmates stood lined up in a quadrangle surrounded by barracks. They seemed to have been lined up just to greet the new transport. During one of our encounters, Mother had said that the Krakow ghetto had been liquidated. The few people who remained had been taken to the camp at Płaszów. Now I thought I saw Raisa and Altbella standing on line with women prisoners. Was this where they were, in Płaszów? Searchlights blinded my eyes, and the sound of the Nazi voices shouted echoed between the barracks. We stood waiting, contained and still. Our breathing poured smoke into the icy air. For 5.5 years, my brother and I had escaped. We had been running and hiding and pretending not to be Jews. We had been protected by Nyanya. During the years of flight, I had heard the fearful word Konzentrationslager so many times, but I had never had a picture in my head of what a concentration camp might really be like. All I knew now was that what we had dreaded the most had finally happened. I was 10 years old, my brother was 8, we were Jews. The Nazis had found us out and caught us at last. The Nazis pushed and shoved and organized. I did not always understand what they were shouting. They began sorting. I held onto my brother's hand. The 2 younger men who had been with us on the transport from the convent were pushed aside. So was the pale young woman from the Benedictine convent. The woman who walked with a cane was pulled out. Then the woman who could not walk at all was dragged toward her and left lying next to her on the ground. The 2 men from our cell in Montelupi, that was the name of the prison, and the teenage boy from the convent were also shoved into that group. His mother tried to follow him, but the guards pushed her back. The boy was quiet and didn't make any fuss. Dragging the old woman along the snow, the guards marched this group back to the truck that had brought us. They must be taking them to another barracks farther away, the boy's mother said. To herself, to us, to the air. Maybe they had left us behind because they had taken whom they wanted. Maybe they would let us wait for Nyanya to come and get us. The truck drove away. I don't know how much time passed before we heard the shots. I had no picture in my head of what was happening there, away from us, from where the sound of shooting had come. I didn't know what I was supposed to be feeling or thinking. And then the woman whose boy had been taken from her began to scream, horribly. Her screams sliced through the icy night, hung there suspended, useless beyond help. In the frozen stillness, the breathing of the camp inmates, the frozen puffs of air, must have stopped. The boy's mother threw herself at my brother and began dragging him toward one of the guards. Look at him, she wailed. Look at him. He's much younger. Why didn't you take him? She frightened us more than the Nazis did. The guards pulled the woman away from my brother and pushed him back toward me. He hadn't made a sound. I didn't dare to take his hand again. Why did they favor us over this woman? Maybe they liked us after all. Maybe Nyanya had talked to them. Maybe they would send for her. The cries of the woman whose son had been shot continued. The guards dragged her away. No more shots were heard. It wasn't a nice time. A few days later, at the morning lineup, I thought I caught a glimpse of the woman whose son had been shot. I hoped that she would look in my direction or my brother's. Things were going well for us. She would surely give us the evil eye. We had been selected to be special, to eat bread and smoked bacon with mustard and even hard-boiled eggs. And then there was a trend. Then all of a sudden, they started liquidating, taking people away from the camp. I saw a picture recently in the Times of a whole bunch of children in striped prison uniforms behind the barbed wire that were left over in Auschwitz. And what had happened, I'm always surprised that there were still young people left. I don't know how they survived, because they never kept anybody who couldn't work. These people survived, and now they've been interviewed, old people like me, older, some of them. What had happened was the Russians came and liberated the camp, and the Germans were supposed to shoot everybody, and somehow they missed this group of children, and the Russians came closer and closer, and the Nazis just ran. So that's how these people survived. We happened to, well, I'll read you this little chapter, a small part of the chapter. Later that evening, we walked through the camp gate. I thought they lined us up. It was a very quick surprise thing, counting and lining up and so on. We didn't know what was happening. It kind of connects to what I told you. Later that evening, we walked through the camp gate. I thought of the people who had been with us when we had been brought in the canvas-covered truck. I thought of those who would never walk out, their bodies forever left behind somewhere outside the barbed wire. We were leaving empty barracks. The searchlights had been turned off. Krakow was not far away, I knew that. When we had been captured, the ride to Washington, the canvas truck had not been long. Now we walked through a dark woods. I walked with the women. The men were somewhere to the right or behind us. What was left of this camp was not a large group. Not far behind us, the Nazi commandant was riding with his possessions on top of one of the two horse-drawn wagons. The guards trudged along the same as the rest of us. They were quieter than usual. This time, we all seemed to be part of the same liquidatia. Not long into the march, I was nudged by Raisa, my cousin, at my side. "You must step out now," my cousin whispered. I didn't understand. We were going through a sparse wooded area. I looked cautiously around me. The Nazis weren't shouting, but their guns were firmly set on their shoulders, gloved hands poised on the leather straps, ever ready to point and shoot. "Step out, you must step out now," and Bella was whispering. "Nyanya will be there, she's waiting for you." Nyanya had come as promised. Nyanya had come as promised? For a moment I wanted to believe. "Where's my brother?" I whispered. "I'm not going without my brother. He will leave soon, he's with Uncle Samuel." My cousin shook my arm. "Step out now, we will all too, step out." The Nazis were marching just ahead of us. I was afraid to turn around to see how many were directly behind us. I didn't believe Raisa. Why were they trying to fool me? "Why don't you step out first?" I whispered. "You and Aunt Bella go." "We promised Nyanya to make sure you were safe first." How had they talked to Nyanya? Where? Why would Nyanya have communicated with Raisa, not with us? Now I was sure she was lying. This was a trick. There had to be a reason for it. They had arranged something with the Nazis, I thought. Raisa had become one of those Jews who were helping Nazis in exchange for some favor. Why hadn't we been shot the night we went to Kwashu? When they shot the old woman with the bandage on her wrist, whom they dragged like a sack along the ground, and the woman with limp and the cane. "Ich kann not arbeiten, ich kann arbeiten," she had probably repeated those words until the bullets hit her. And that boy whose mother screamed, take him," about my brother, trying to yank him out of the line. We were just as useless as we had been spared. Now we were part of some kind of exchange. Now everyone had enough of us. My aunt and my cousin wanted to be rid of us. It was dark, but in January the trees were bare. The Nazis carried strong flashlights. It would be easy to spot anyone who tried to sneak away. This was not the same as that sleepy, warm afternoon when we had walked across a bridge out of the ghetto. I began to cry. That frightened the women around me. "Shh, shh." We were creating a commotion. Any minute a guard could be upon us. Raisa stepped aside and stopped badgering me. Anyway, we kept walking. We never stepped out of that column, and evidently there had been an arrangement with a woman who had worked for my uncle and was very devoted. Less hysterical, but just as devoted as Nyanya. and they were supposed to step out of that, and there was somebody waiting for them in a dark corner, and because they had been responsible for my brother and me, everybody stayed on the march, and eventually both my aunt and my uncle were killed in the last day of the wars. So, in a way, it was my fault. But I didn't know, I didn't trust them. Sometimes during the night, several shots rang out. We heard screaming, we saw women kneeling in the field by the side of the road. A Nazi stood over her in the light moon like a large stain was spreading, coloring the snow black. There were other shots, and no more screams, just volleys of the usual German shouting. We walked by, we walked on. On a January night in 1945, we were walking till we didn't know it. Well, we ended up in Auschwitz for overnight, and then after that in the cattle corps to Ravensbrück, where in April we were rescued by the Swedish white buses, and that's how I ended up here. My life in Sweden was absolutely wonderful. I became I was one of the A group of girls in school. There were such things. I don't know that it wasn't called like that. But I had a great time with my friends. I was very grateful to be there. For about 2.5 or 3 years, I was very happy to be with my parents, reunited, but that euphoria really passed. By the time I was 14 or 15, I was becoming a regular Swedish girl with a circle of teenage friends, doing well in school, singing in a fine church choir, attending evening classes in art, gossiping about and pursuing boys in dance halls where Swedish bands imitated American big band swings and Dixieland music. We went to black and white gangster and torrid melodrama movies from America and the Technicolor musicals. Those stunned me because students our age had their own convertibles and went to football games, and the girls wore gorgeous clothes and had beautiful teeth and got orchid corsages when they were invited to go out. Occasionally my friends and I used our school English to talk to each other, not unlike the Russians in 19th century novels speaking French. Like we really were, so we had to be serious about studying English. It was very required. German was required as well, and then if you intended to go on to university, you had to have French. So it was 3 languages, and this was not elective, it was not anything like that. So after almost 7 years of real life in Sweden, in this wonderful country, I had felt myself lulled into a pleasant forever with a language that I loved, and there was no reason to even formulate the thought that I might not continue. My parents did not get assimilated. The reserved Swedes, always calm and correct, were not easy to get to know, and I'm not so sure that my parents would have even tried. The Swedish, they had a circle of friends, but they were all mostly other Jewish refugees who trickled in from Poland. Most of these people had survived avoiding concentration camp, and they were all waiting for exit visas. To emigrate to Israel or America or South America, but I didn't think any of this had to do with me. What I didn't know is that all this time my parents had been applying for visas to the United States, and when I found that out in 1951, I was crushed. My newly found, lovely, wonderful life was yanked out of my grasp by my parents, who absolutely had to come to America to be closer to some remaining relatives. At the age of 10, I had been rescued away from Poland, from the Nazis, and now I was in a country that I'd grown to love, and at the age of not quite 17, I was exiled again against my will. Formidable, challenging New York City. We are out of time. Oh my God. I knew I was going to do this. One of the terrible things that give me my 5 more minutes. One of the really, really ridiculous things I did when I came to America, to New York, I was very unhappy. I had been almost finished with high school, and now I had to go back and take these courses that were required. I was 2 years older at least than most of the girls who were in my class. But one of the things that were great is that it was an all-girls public high school in New York City. And what happened was that it had an art major. For 4 hours every morning, I was able to paint. I had a very wonderful teacher. I managed to complete all the other courses, and all I did was paint for 4 hours every morning. The teacher helped me make a portfolio, and that's how I ended up with Pratt. And this part of my life really began. And then I got married, and the other story I told you, and if you want to look at the artwork, it's here, right here, and you can go and take a look at it. I never wanted to write no pretty pictures. I didn't want to identify myself with it. I thought I was a different person. I had come out of something and I was making something of myself, transforming myself all the time. The only reason I wrote the book is because I joined a writer's group and I suddenly discovered I could make something out of it. And it was a self-propelling kind of thing, and I wrote the book. Contemporary pop psychology dictates that we should make connections between our scars and the creative outputs. I'm not so sure that the resulting creations correspond. It certainly has not done that for me at all. I wrote the book, and it's being appreciated, and it's being discussed, which is fine. I'm not sure, right after I did it, I'm not sure that I didn't regret it. And I was also sorry that I had ever even mentioned that these things happened to me, so that they didn't have to be I didn't have to be constantly introduced as that person who survived. I want to thank you for listening to me. Words, words, words. Hamlet says it to foolish Polonius. He says it because he knows how to use them. Polonius prattles away, and I don't want to be one of the prattlers, not yet. So let's go forth. Thank you for lending me your ears. And my husband wrote at the end of one of his fables, all's well that ends with a good meal. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Jumped around. Improvisation, like sketching on a pad.
I think we all agree we've been treated to a wonderful presentation today. Anita, there's no question about the indomitable spirit that has characterized your life. You have faced your own walls and found bridges. And for the rest of us, you have drawn and written about bridges for our own inspiration. And we're enormously grateful to you for this opportunity. I would like to invite Sam Galuli to come to the platform. Sam, he's going to lead us in singing of the alma mater.